Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. Blood and Starlight. The mud had a voice. It was a wet, sucking gasp that pulled at his boots with every step, a sound that had become the anthem of this God's-forsaken war. Arden was a man made of mud and marrow-deep weariness, his once fine armor now a pitted, rust-stained shell. The plague had taken the heat from the conflict, leaving behind the cold, administrative business of death. Villages burned not in glorious conquest, but as pyres for the infected. The air was a thick broth of smoke and decay. He moved through the skeletal remains of an oak grove, his small band of mercenaries, the dregs and the desperate, shadows at his back. Their payment for this last, ugly job was not in coin, but in a promise, a clean pardon from the Lord Commander of the Eastern Reach. A pardon for men who had done things that could never be washed clean. There, Kale, his second, rasped, pointing a grimy finger through the splintered trees. Below, in the valley, a carriage lay crippled, one wheel shattered. It was too fine for these parts, its dark wood carved with the sigil of a silver falcon, the mark of Lord Valerius. The few guards who hadn't fled or fallen to the bandits that had clearly ambushed them were making a final, hopeless stand. Arden's eyes, the color of a winter storm, scanned the scene. He wasn't looking for guards or spoils. His target was specific. The girl, he said, his voice gravel. Alive. They descended like wolves upon the wounded. Arden's sword was a practical, brutal thing, and it ended the remaining struggle with efficient, unspectacular strokes. He kicked aside a body, his gaze fixed on the carriage door. He wrenched it open. The interior was shadowed, smelling of rose oil and fear. And there she was, curled in the far corner. Mirael. Betrothed of Lord Valerius. Her reputation preceded her, a jewel of the court, a maiden of untouched beauty, a devotee of the Holy Order's Lightbringer faith. She was all of that, and less. Her gown was the color of cream, now smudged with dirt, and her hair, the pale gold of harvested wheat, had escaped its intricate braids to frame a face of such startling delicacy it seemed a strong wind would crack it. But her eyes were not those of a frightened songbird. They were the color of violets after rain, and they held a fire that banked the terror, replacing it with a defiant, lucid anger. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded, her voice trembling but clear. "I do," Arden said, reaching for her. His gauntlet hand was monstrous against the fine silk of her sleeve. "He will burn the world to find me. He will flay the skin from your bones. Let him try." He pulled her from the carriage. She was light, a bundle of kindling in his arms. She fought, not with hysterics, but with a fierce, futile struggle that earned a grunt of respect from Kale. "Spirited little thing," the man chuckled, his teeth yellow in his grimy beard. Arden ignored him, binding Mirael's wrists with a strip of leather. "Your betrothed holds the pardon my men and I were promised," he reneged. "You are the collateral to ensure he honors his word." "You are a fool," she spat, her breath a white cloud in the chill air. "Valerius deals in blood, not honor." He threw her over his saddle before mounting behind her, his body a cage of steel and muscle. She went rigid, every line of her back screaming her revulsion. As they rode away from the carnage, The first drops of a cold rain began to fall, plastering her hair to her neck and tracing paths through the grime on his face. They rode for hours, through landscapes of utter desolation. Fields lay fallow and blackened, farmsteads were silent, their doors hanging open like slack jaws. The plague had been a silent, invisible reaper, leaving the war to scavenge the bones. The rain turned into a persistent, misting drizzle that clung to his cloak and beaded on her pale hair like tiny diamonds. He made camp in the shell of a stone watchtower, its roof long gone, open to the sky. He sat her against a damp wall, handing her a strip of dried venison and a water skin. She took them with a regal nod, as if he were a servant, but she ate and drank with a hunger that betrayed her courtly composure. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice small in the vast, ruined space. The fire he'd built painted dancing shadows on the broken walls. "Why become this? A man who steals women for a lord who betrayed him." Arden stared into the flames, seeing other fires in their depths. "There is no becoming. There is only survival. The world is a butcher's block. Some of us are the meat, some the cleaver. I chose the cleaver. A poetic philosophy for a brute." He looked at her then, truly looked. The firelight softened the sharp angles of her fear, gilding her in warmth. She was beauty incarnate, a thing from an illuminated manuscript, and he was the bloody thumbprint smearing its page. The sacred and the profane. "I was a knight once," he said, the words torn from him, surprising them both. "Sworn to a different lord, to a code. I believed in it. Then the plague came. The code didn't stop men from burning their own families alive in their homes. It didn't stop lords like your Valerius from using the chaos to seize land and power. The only thing that matters is power. The power to take what you want. The power to keep what is yours." Her violet eyes searched his face, and for a moment, he saw not judgment, but a profound, weary understanding. The Lightbringers teach that power without grace is a curse. "Then the world is cursed," he said, his voice flat. "And we are all its inheritors." He stood, cutting the conversation short, and walked to the tower's broken entrance to stare out at the night. The rain had stopped. The clouds had parted, revealing a sky of impossible clarity, dusted with a billion cold, distant stars. It was then that he saw it. A faint smear of red at the edge of his vision. He looked up. It grew, a fiery tear across the velvet blackness. A comet, its tail ablazing, blood-red scar, burning a path through the constellations. It was an omen. Every soldier, every peasant, every lord knew it. It was in the old stories, the forbidden texts the Holy Order tried to suppress. The sanguine star. The harbinger. A soft gasp came from behind him. Mirael had risen to her feet, her bindings forgotten, her face upturned to the heavens, bathed in the comet's eerie, crimson light. Her expression was one of not fear, but of terrifying, awestruck recognition. And then it happened. A searing, white-hot pain exploded behind Arden's eyes. He cried out, falling to one knee, his vision swimming. At the same moment, Mirael gasped, clutching her own chest as if struck. A wave of energy, silent and invisible, pulsed out from them. Arden's shadow, cast by the fire against the tower wall, did not simply lengthen. It detached. It stretched and twisted, a thing of living darkness, and for a horrifying moment, it reached for Mirael. And from Mirael, a soft, silver light emanated from her skin, a light that her own shadow tried to flee from, stretching and warping to escape her radiance. The two shadows, his of absolute blackness, hers of shimmering silver, met on the stone wall. They did not blend. They fought, a silent, violent ballet of opposing forces, before slamming back into their owners with a physical force that knocked the air from his lungs. The world snapped back into place. The comet continued its silent journey. The fire crackled. Arden pushed himself up, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at Mirael. She was staring at her hands, which now seemed to hold a faint, internal luminescence. Then she looked at him, her eyes wide with a terror that was entirely new. He looked down at his own hands. Where the firelight should have cast a warm glow, the shadows clung to him like a second skin, deep and hungry and alive. The bond was forged. The curse was awake. And in the distance, carried on the night wind, came the clear, mournful sound of a war horn. Not Valerius's men. This was a different, more chilling sound. The single, resonant note of the Holy Order. The hunters had found their prey. The war horn's note was a cold blade in the night, severing the strange, silent aftermath of the comet's passing. The Holy Order. They did not hunt mercenaries or ransom brides. They hunted heresy. And whatever had just happened between him and the girl, whatever had made their shadows writhe and light bleed from her skin, was heresy of the highest order. All traces of weariness burned away from Arden, replaced by the sharp, clean adrenaline of survival. We move. Now, he barked, his voice cutting through the stunned stillness of his men. Cale was already stamping out the fire, his face grim. The order? Here? They follow the omen, Mirael whispered, her voice thin. She was still staring at her hands, the faint silver luminescence already fading. They felt it. They feel us. Arden didn't question her. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip firm but less brutal than before. The feel of her skin through the fabric of her sleeve was different now, a faint, humming warmth, like holding a sun-warmed stone. He hauled her towards the horses. "What did you do?" he growled, lifting her onto his saddle. Her violet eyes, wide and terrified, met his. "I did nothing. It was the star. The sanguine star. It's in the oldest texts, it awakens what sleeps in the blood." She looked at the shadows that seemed to cling to him with an unnerving density. And in the shadow. They rode hard, abandoning stealth for speed. The thunder of their horses' hooves was a desperate drumbeat against the hard, frosted earth. The order's horn sounded again, closer this time, a single, unwavering note that promised no mercy. Arden risked a glance back. On the ridge behind them, a line of torchlights appeared, not the scattered flames of a search party, but a disciplined, advancing wall of fire. At least 50 riders, their polished armor reflecting the hellish glow. They pushed the horses to the edge of endurance, plunging into a forest of skeletal, silver-barked trees. The canopy above was thick, blotting out the bloody light of the comet, plunging them into a darkness that felt alive to Arden. The shadows beneath the trees were not an absence of light, but a presence. He could feel them, a cool, silken pressure against his skin. He could feel the panic of a rabbit hiding in its burrow to their left, the patient, cold hunger of an owl perched above. The world was speaking to him in a language of darkness he had never known. Mirael, pressed against his chest, was a knot of tension. But her light was a counterpoint to his newfound sense. A soft, pearlescent glow began to emanate from her again, an involuntary reaction to the oppressive dark. It pushed back the shadows around them, creating a small, safe bubble of illumination. A moth, confused by the unseasonable light, fluttered near her shoulder. "Can you control it?" he asked, his voice low, meant for her alone. "I don't know how," she breathed, her fear palpable. "It feels like breathing. But a breath I've never taken before." The forest sloped downwards, leading to a rushing, ice-fed river. The only crossing was a narrow, ancient bridge of stone and roped wood, slick with spray. It was a perfect bottleneck. A perfect trap. They were halfway across when the Order's cavalry emerged from the trees on the bank they had just left, forming a solid line. They were not like Valerius's men. Their armor was stark white, emblazoned with a golden sunburst, their faces hidden behind full helms. They carried not just swords, but heavy, rune-etched maces for breaking bones and faith. Their leader, a figure with a white-plumed helm, urged his horse forward. His voice, when it came, was amplified and distorted by the helm, devoid of humanity. "Abominations. The star has revealed you. Surrender the vessel of false light and the Shadow Eater to the Order's justice." Arden drew his sword, the rasp of steel loud in the space between the river's roar and the horn's echo. "We are not your concern, Zealot. You are a corruption of the natural order," the Inquisitor boomed. "A fusion of profane darkness and stolen grace. You will be unmade." He raised a hand. Crossbows were leveled from the line of knights. Arden acted on an instinct he didn't understand. He didn't think of defense, of parrying. He thought of concealment. He reached for the deep, cool well of power he now felt within him, the essence of the shadows that clung to him. He pushed it outward. A wave of absolute blackness erupted from him, swallowing the bridge, the riverbanks, the world. It was more than an absence of light, it was a physical, clinging darkness that blinded, muffled sound, and filled the air with the scent of cold stone and old blood. He heard the thwip of crossbow bolts, but they went wild, lost in the void he had created. Mirael cried out, but her own light flared in response, a brilliant, silver star at the heart of his darkness. It didn't dispel his shadow, but coexisted with it, creating a chaotic, stunning tableau of opposing forces held in a tense, impossible balance. "Ride!" Arden roared, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. They charged across the rest of the bridge, the hoofs of their horses the only sure sound in the unnatural night he had woven. As they reached the far bank, his control shattered. The darkness snapped back into him with a force that left him dizzy, the world rushing back in a blaze of torchlight and sound. But they had gained precious seconds. They vanished into the trees on the other side as the Order's knights, disoriented and furious, tried to regroup on the bridge. They rode until the horses could no longer carry them, finally stopping in a deep gully hidden by thick pines. The men collapsed, breathing in ragged gasps, casting fearful glances at Arden and the girl. They had seen the darkness. They had seen the light. Cale approached him, his face a mask of wariness. Arden, what in the seven hells was that? A trick of the light, Arden said, his voice dangerously calm. He was exhausted, his bones feeling heavy, as if the shadows he had commanded had a tangible weight. That was no trick, Cale insisted, his eyes darting to Mirael, who sat huddled by a tree, her arms wrapped around herself, still softly aglow. The stories, the old curses, they're real. And we're caught in the middle of one. We have a job to do, Arden said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She gets us our pardon. Nothing has changed. But everything had changed. He walked away from Cale, his own mind reeling. He found a secluded spot and looked at his hands. He willed the darkness to come. A tendril of pure black smoke, like living ink, coiled from his fingertips, dancing in the air. It was a part of him. It was power. The kind of power he had told Mirael was the only thing that mattered. And it terrified him. He looked over at Mirael. She had her head bowed, and he saw a single, silver tear trace a path down her cheek. Where it fell onto the frozen leaf litter, a tiny, perfect white flower pushed through the frost and bloomed. He was the butcher's cleaver. She was the hand that could make life grow from death. And they were bound, irrevocably, by a curse written in blood and starlight. The Holy Order was not the only hunter they had to fear. They had to fear what they were becoming. The gully offered a cold, temporary sanctuary. The men huddled in a nervous circle, their earlier camaraderie replaced by a tense silence. They drank stale water and chewed on hardtack, their eyes avoiding both Arden and the softly glowing girl. They were soldiers of fortune, men who understood steel and blood, not living shadows and starlight made flesh. This was a currency they couldn't spend and a danger they couldn't fight. Arden felt their fear like a physical chill. He stood apart, leaning against the rough bark of a pine, his gaze fixed on the eastern horizon where the first hints of dawn bled into the sky, a dull gray against the lingering, malevolent red of the comet. The power he had unleashed on the bridge still hummed in his veins, a dark, seductive melody. It had felt good. To command the darkness, to twist reality to his will. It was the ultimate power he had craved in this broken world. But the cost was a hollow ache in his chest, a coldness that seemed to be seeping into his soul. His eyes were drawn to Mirael. She had not moved from her spot, her back against a tree, knees drawn to her chest. The faint luminescence had faded, leaving her pale and shivering in the pre-dawn cold. The single, miraculous flower that had bloomed from her tear was a stark white beacon in the gloom. He saw her not as a commodity, a key to his pardon, but as a person adrift in a nightmare of his making. A strange, protective impulse, foreign and unwelcome, stirred within him. He shrugged off his heavy, travel-stained cloak and walked over to her. He did not speak, simply draped the coarse wool over her shoulders. She flinched at his touch, her violet eyes flying open to meet his. In their depths, he saw no gratitude, only a profound and weary confusion. "The light," he said, his voice low. "Does it hurt?" She shook her head, pulling the cloak tighter. "No. It's warm. It's the only thing that is." She looked at the flower at her feet, her expression one of awe and horror. "But I cannot control it. It acts through me. Like your shadows." "It saved us on the bridge," he admitted grudgingly. Your light held the darkness at bay, kept it from consuming me. And your darkness shielded my light from being snuffed out, she whispered, the realization dawning in her eyes. They are bound. Opposed, but balanced. The sound of approaching horses, too many and moving too fast to be the methodical order, shattered the moment. Arden was on his feet in an instant, his sword in his hand. Cale and the others scrambled for their weapons. But it was not the white-clad knights who broke through the tree line. It was Lord Valerius's men. They were a hard, brutal force, their armor bearing the silver falcon, but tarnished by soot and blood. At their head was a man Arden recognized, Borlin, Valerius's captain, a brute with a face like a hatchet and a reputation for cruelty that even mercenaries found excessive. Borlin's eyes swept over the scene, lingering on Arden's drawn sword and then on Mirael, huddled in his cloak. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. Arden. The Lord Commander sends his regards. And a counteroffer. Arden said nothing, his body coiled like a spring. He will grant your pardon, Borlin continued, his voice slick with false bonhomie. In exchange for the girl and your head. Seems he took personal offense to the theft of his property. His eyes glinted. And we found the remains of your little shadow play back at the bridge. The order is screaming heresy. Valerius can't be seen to be associated with that. Clean break, you see? Betrayal. It was as constant as the sunrise. Arden felt a cold fury settle over him, colder than the shadow power in his veins. He had been a fool to think he could deal with a snake like Valerius. The girl comes with us, Borlin finished, his hand dropping to the hilt of his own sword. One way or another. Arden's men looked at him, their faces etched with conflict. A pardon was a pardon, but this was a death sentence for their leader. It was Cale who spoke, his voice heavy. Arden, maybe it's the only way. Before Arden could answer, Mirael stood up. She let Arden's cloak fall from her shoulders, standing straight and tall amidst the armed men. The first ray of the rising sun broke over the gully's edge, catching in her pale hair and causing her skin to glow with an inner fire. She was no longer the frightened captive. She was something else entirely. Tell Lord Valerius, she said, her voice clear and resonant, carrying an authority that silenced the clearing, that I am not his property. And I will not be bargained for by liars and killers. Borlin laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You'll come, my lady, even if I have to drag you by that pretty hair. He took a step forward. And the world erupted. Arden did not summon the shadows this time. They erupted from him, a geyser of raw, furious darkness. It was not the controlled blanket of concealment from the bridge, this was a storm. Tendrils of living night lashed out, not to blind, but to destroy. They wrapped around Borlin's leading leg, and with a sickening crack of bone and rending of plate metal, they pulled him from his saddle. At the same moment, Mirael cried out, not in fear, but in a surge of defiant power. A wave of pure, silver light shot from her, slamming into the front rank of Valerius's men. It didn't burn them, but it threw them back as if struck by a physical wall, horses screaming and rearing in panic. Where the light touched the frost-covered ground, a carpet of white clover and blue starflowers burst into life, a beautiful, impossible assault. The gully became a battleground of two impossible forces. Arden was a vortex of shadow, his sword a secondary tool to the whips and claws of darkness he commanded with brutal efficiency. He was vengeance incarnate, every betrayal, every loss, fueling the storm. He felt the shadows drinking in the fear of the soldiers, growing stronger. And Mirael was his devastating counterpart. Her light was a shield, deflecting arrows and sword strokes, protecting Arden's flanks. It was also a weapon of stunning force, throwing men from their feet, leaving them dazed and bewildered amidst the suddenly blooming flora. They fought not as two people, but as one entity. He could feel her, a bright, hot star in his consciousness. He knew where she was, the ebb and flow of her power. When a soldier lunged at her from the side, Arden's shadow was there before his own mind could process the threat, wrapping around the man's throat and hurling him into a tree. When an archer took aim at Arden's exposed back, Mirael's light flared, a brilliant flash that blinded the man and made his shot go wide. It was over in minutes. Borland and his men lay broken, scattered among the strange, beautiful flowers that now covered the gully floor. The survivors fled into the forest, their courage shattered by the supernatural onslaught. Silence descended, broken only by the panting of Arden's men, who had barely needed to lift a weapon. They stared at Arden and Mirael with a mixture of terror and reverence. Arden stood amidst the carnage, the shadow slowly receding back into him, leaving him feeling drained and stained. He looked at his hands, half expecting to see blood, but there was only the lingering sensation of the cold, dark power. Mirael was breathing heavily, her glow fading. She looked at the field of flowers growing amongst the dead and the wounded, her face a portrait of anguish. "What are we becoming?" she whispered, the words meant for him alone. Arden had no answer. The cleaver had learned to feel, and the light had learned to kill. The bond was no longer just a curse, it was a weapon. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. Valerius would not forgive this humiliation. The Order would not stop its hunt. They were alone in a world that wanted them unmade, their only solace a bond forged in blood and starlight, a connection that grew deeper and more terrifying with every passing moment. The gully of flowers and corpses was no place to remain. The air itself felt heavy with the paradox of their power, life and death blooming in the same soil. Kale and the others packed their meager supplies with a new, grim efficiency. They no longer looked at Arden and Mirael as man and captive, but as forces of nature, unpredictable and terrifying. The pardon was a forgotten dream, survival was the only currency left. They moved north, towards the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains, a place of old magic and older fears, where the long arm of both Valerius and the Holy Order might hesitate to follow. The landscape grew steeper, the air thinner and sharp with the scent of pine and cold stone. The comet, the sanguine star, remained a constant, baleful eye in the sky, its light painting the world in hues of blood and iron. The bond between them was a living thing now, a taut wire strung between their souls. Arden could feel the ebb and flow of Mirael's light like a second heartbeat. When she grew tired, a chill would seep into his own bones. When his own dark thoughts threatened to consume him, a flicker of her warmth would brush against his mind, an unwelcome but steadying anchor. They spoke little, the memory of the battle in the gully a chasm between them. He had reveled in the shadow's power, she had been horrified by the violence her light could enable. He was a killer who could command the dark. She was a beacon of life that could be weaponized. The sacred had been profaned, and the profane had been sanctified, and neither knew where that left them. On the third day, they found the sanctuary. It was a fortress, but not one built by men. It was a colossal, Gothic structure of obsidian stone that seemed to have been grown from the mountain itself, its spires like twisted claws scraping at the sky. Vines thick as a man's arm, bearing night-blooming flowers the color of bruises, crawled up its walls. It was a place of powerful, ancient magic, a nexus where the veil between worlds was thin. The Black Sepulchre, Mirael breathed, her eyes wide. The texts say it was a temple to a forgotten god, a place of balance between light and shadow. It's been lost for ages. It's defensible, Arden said, his mercenary mind assessing the narrow approach, the high walls. But he felt it too, a thrum of power that resonated with both the darkness within him and the light within her. It was a place that recognized them. They passed under the immense, rune-carved archway into a vast central courtyard open to the sky. The sanguine star cast its bloody light upon a scene of breathtaking, haunted beauty. A carpet of bioluminescent moss cast a soft blue glow, and in the center, a spring of impossibly clear water bubbled up, its surface reflecting the starry sky and the comet both. The air was still and warm, smelling of wet stone and exotic blossoms. For the first time in days, they were safe. Truly safe. The tension that had sustained them began to unravel. Cale and the men found a dry barracks off the main hall and collapsed into exhausted sleep. But for Arden and Mirael, sleep was a distant country. He found her at the edge of the glowing spring, kneeling, her hands skimming the surface of the water. Where her fingers touched, the water shimmered with intensified silver light. "We cannot run forever," she said, not turning as he approached. "I know." She looked up at him, her face illuminated by the dual lights of the moss and the comet. The defiance was gone, replaced by a deep, soul-weary vulnerability. "What happened in the gully? Your shadows, they felt your rage. Your pain. It fuels them, doesn't it?" Arden stood over her, a silhouette against the star-strewn sky. "Yes. Every betrayal. Every death. It's all fodder. And my light," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "It answers your darkness. It answers the pain in you. It wants to heal it. To balance it." She rose to face him, the few inches between them feeling like a chasm and a precipice at once. "I feel it, Arden. I feel the scars on your soul. The village you couldn't save. The men you led to their deaths. The knight you used to be." He flinched, the words striking a nerve he kept buried deep. "Don't." "Why?" she challenged, stepping closer. The warmth of her radiated against the chill that perpetually clung to him now. "You forced this bond upon us both when you took me. You dragged me into your darkness. Now you feel me in your mind, and you cannot bear it?" His control, worn thin by exhaustion and the proximity of her power, snapped. He grabbed her arms, not with brutality, but with a fierce, desperate intensity. "I see your light, Mirael. I feel its purity. It burns me. It reminds me of everything I am not. Everything I have lost." His shadow stirred, rising from the floor like a living mist, encircling them. Her light flared in response, a soft, silver nimbus that pushed against the encroaching dark. They were caught in the space between, their powers mingling in the air, a tangible, crackling tension. "It doesn't have to be a curse," she whispered, her violet eyes searching his stormy ones. Her gaze dropped to his lips. The last thread of his resistance broke. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision, of desperation and longing, of shadow and light. It was a battle and a surrender all at once. His darkness wrapped around them, a protective, possessive shroud, while her light poured into him, not to burn, but to illuminate the shattered places inside. He saw flashes of her life, the gilded cage of the court, the cold devotion of the order, a loneliness that mirrored his own. She saw his, the ideals shattered, the friendships broken, the slow, grim descent into the man he was. It was a profane act, this union of a killer and a holy woman, and it was the most sacred thing either had ever known. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the world had shifted. The bond was no longer a chain, but a choice. The shadows and light had retreated, leaving them standing in the quiet glow of the moss, two people laid bare. He rested his forehead against hers, his breath stirring her hair. "I will get you to safety," he vowed, his voice raw. "Away from all of this. Away from me." Mirael placed a hand on his chest, over his heart. "There is no away from this, Arden. The comet chose us. This bond chose us." She looked towards the fortress's great archway, beyond which the world waited to destroy them. "Our love is either the key to healing this land, or the fire that drowns it. There is no in-between." In the silence of the black sepulchre, under the gaze of the blood-red star, they made a different choice. Not to run, but to understand. Not to fight their destiny, but to face it. Together. The world outside the black sepulchre did not wait. The sanctuary of ancient stone and glowing moss became a crucible. For 7 days and 7 nights, they did not hide. They learned. The bond, now acknowledged, became a conduit not just for power, but for understanding. In the sepulchre's vast, echoing chambers, they tested its limits. Arden learned to channel his shadows not from a place of rage, but from a cold, focused will. He could make them solid as iron, weaving a shield of night that could stop a crossbow bolt. He could make them thin as smoke, sending them slithering through cracks to see what lay in the chambers beyond. The fortress whispered its secrets to his darkness, showing him hidden passages and forgotten libraries where books bound in pale leather whispered of stars and bonds. Mirael learned to call her light not from blind faith, but from a place of profound empathy. She could make it a scalpel, healing the deep gash on Kale's arm from the gully fight, the flesh knitting together under her silver touch until only a faint scar remained. She could make it a lens, focusing it through a crystal they found in the library until it burned a clean, precise hole through a block of granite. She spent hours in the library, her glow illuminating the ancient texts. She read aloud to Arden of the Sanguine Star, a celestial event that occurred once a millennium, awakening latent bloodlines and forging bonds between opposing forces to restore a balance the world had lost. "It's not a curse," she said one evening, her voice filled with a scholar's excitement. She stood before a massive fresco they had uncovered, depicting 2 figures, one of shimmering light, one of consuming shadow, standing back to back, holding a crumbling world between them. "It's a trial. A test for a new kind of guardian." Arden came to stand beside her, the warmth of her body a familiar comfort now. He looked at the shadowed figure in the fresco, no longer seeing a monster, but a sentinel. The Order calls it heresy. Valerius calls it a weapon. They will never see it as anything else. Then we must make them see, she said, her voice firm. She placed her hand over his, where it rested on the pommel of his sword. Her light and his shadow did not fight at the point of contact, they coiled together, light and dark, creating a beautiful, swirling gray. Or we must stand against them. It was Kale, his arm now fully functional, who brought the outside world crashing back in. He returned from a scouting trip down the mountain, his face grim. The Order is massing at the foothills. A full chapter. And Valerius, he spat. He's made a pact with them. He's given them legitimacy and supplies. In return, they turn a blind eye while his armies swallow the neighboring territories. They're coming for us together. They call you the twin abominations. The news should have brought fear. Instead, it brought a cold, clear certainty. The time for hiding was over. On the 8th morning, they stood side by side on the sepulchre's highest tower, looking down at the army gathering like a blight on the green valley below. The white of the Holy Order and the silver of Valerius's falcons were a stark, ugly contrast to the vibrant land. They were not just coming to kill two people, they were coming to eradicate an idea. They outnumber us 100 to 1, Arden stated, the strategist in him assessing the hopeless odds. They fight for conquest and dogma, Mirael replied, her hand finding his. Her touch was steady. We fight for balance. She turned to him, her violet eyes holding his. The texts speak of a ritual. A confluence. The bonded pair, at the heart of their power, can unleash a wave of pure creation, or absolute dissolution. It requires a total surrender. To the light, and to the shadow. Arden understood. It was all or nothing. To save the land from being drowned in the fire of war and fanaticism, they would have to risk becoming the very fire themselves. He saw the faith in her eyes, not in her old gods, but in them. In him. He, the disillusioned mercenary, had found something to believe in again. Then we give them a choice, he said, his voice low and fierce. They can stand down, or they can face the consequence of the world they have broken. As one, they turned from the tower and descended into the heart of the fortress, to the courtyard with the glowing spring. They did not prepare for a battle of swords. They prepared for a revelation. Below, the combined army began its ascent. The air grew thick with the sound of chanting priests and the clank of armored columns. They breached the outer wall, flooding into the lower courtyards, their torches defiling the ancient peace. Arden and Mirael stood in the center of the moss-lit courtyard, back to back, as they had seen in the fresco. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he did not reach for the pain and the rage. He reached for the memory of her light in the darkness, for the feel of her hand in his, for the fragile, terrifying hope she had planted in his scarred heart. He surrendered to the shadow, not as a weapon, but as a part of the whole. And Mirael surrendered to the light. She let go of her fear, her doctrine, her past. She poured every ounce of her love for this broken, beautiful man, for this wounded world, into the power that flowed from her. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. From Arden, a tide of pure, silent darkness rolled out, blacker than a moonless midnight. It swept through the advancing soldiers, but it did not crush or maim. It showed them their own inner shadows, their secret shames, their hidden cruelties, the compromises they had made. Men fell to their knees, weeping, as the darkness held up a mirror to their souls. From Mirael, a wave of blinding, brilliant light followed. It did not burn, but illuminated. It poured into the soldiers, showing them the beauty they had forgotten, the memory of a lover's smile, the peace of a quiet dawn, the innocence of a child's laugh. It showed them what they were fighting to destroy. The two waves, shadow and light, met and swirled together in the center of the fortress, no longer opposing forces, but two sides of the same coin. They became a swirling vortex of gray, silver, and black, a tangible manifestation of truth and choice. The very air hummed with power, with the sacred and the profane finally reconciled. The soldiers of Valerius and the knights of the order dropped their weapons. They were not struck down, they were shown. They saw the hollow ambition of their lord, the blind zealotry of their faith. The invasion crumbled not from force, but from a collective, awestruck disillusionment. But at the heart of the vortex, the cost was being paid. Arden felt the darkness pulling him apart, the act of such vast, uncontrolled creation tearing at the fabric of his being. Mirael felt her light burning too brightly, consuming the vessel that contained it. They had become the conduit for a power too great for mortal flesh. As the last of the army broke and fled back down the mountain, the vortex collapsed. The courtyard fell silent. Arden slumped to his knees. He looked at Mirael, her form shimmering, translucent with spent power. He had done it. He had saved her. He had given her a world with a chance of peace. He smiled, a true, unburdened smile, as the last of his strength failed him, and the world went dark. Silence. It was the first thing Arden was aware of. A deep, profound quiet that was not of the tomb, but of a world holding its breath. He felt weightless, suspended in a gray expanse that was neither light nor shadow, but the perfect, still balance between them. There was no pain. No fear. Only a vast, echoing peace. Then, a sensation. A warmth on his face, gentle and persistent. And a sound, breaking the silence. A single, soft sob. He forced his eyes open. The world swam into focus, blurred at the edges. He was lying on the cool, smooth stone of the courtyard, his head cradled in Mirael's lap. Her face was above his, etched with an agony that seemed to stop his heart. Silver tears fell from her eyes, each one a tiny, perfect star that landed on his chest, his cheeks, his lips. They were warm, and where they touched his cold skin, a faint, golden light lingered. "Arden," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please." He tried to speak, to tell her it was all right, that he had made his choice and he would make it again 1,000 times over. But no sound came. He could feel the emptiness inside him, the place where the shadows had lived, now a hollow, silent cavern. He had given everything. The comet's light was fading from the sky above, its bloody hue softening to a memory, its purpose served. He watched her, memorizing the lines of her face, the violet of her eyes, the way her pale hair fell around them like a curtain shutting out the world. This was a good death. A death with meaning. A death for her. Her tears fell faster. No, she breathed, a command, a plea, a prayer. I did not surrender to the light to lose you to the dark. I will not accept this balance. She lowered her head, her forehead touching his, and he felt the last of her power, not the blazing, ritualistic force that had turned an army, but something older, more fundamental. It was the light of life itself, of stubborn, defiant love. She poured it into him, not as a weapon or a shield, but as a seed. The light that frees, she whispered, the words from the old texts taking on a new, personal meaning. You are free, Arden. Free of the pain. Free of the rage. Now come back to me. The warmth of her tears and the heat of her love poured into the hollow within him. And something sparked. It was not the return of the hungry, cold shadows. It was something new. A soft, golden glow kindled in the center of his chest, where her tears had fallen most heavily. It was warm, alive, and it was his. It spread through his veins, not erasing the essence of the shadow, but weaving itself around it. The darkness was still there, but it was no longer empty, it was the fertile soil from which this new light grew. He drew in a sharp, ragged breath, the air burning his lungs with the sweet agony of life. Mirael gasped, her eyes flying open. Arden? His hand, which had felt like stone, twitched. He lifted it, marveling at the sight. His flesh was no longer pale, nor did it have the hungry darkness clinging to it. It seemed whole, solid. And when he willed it, a wisp of gentle, gray smoke, not black, not silver, but a fusion of both, curled from his fingertips. Mirael, he said, her name a prayer on his lips. He sat up, and she fell into his arms, her body shaking with sobs of relief. They held each other as the dawn truly broke, the fading red of the comet finally surrendering to the gold and rose of the sun. The world was washed clean. In the days that followed, the survivors of the army, those who had been touched by their revelation, did not return to their old masters. They spoke of what they had seen and felt. They spoke of the twin guardians of the sepulchre, no longer abominations, but avatars of a new age. The story spread faster than any army could march. Lord Valerius, his power base crumbling as the truth of his pact with the Order came to light, was overthrown by his own court. The Holy Order, its authority shattered by the direct, undeniable experience of a power it could not control or condemn, fractured into arguing factions. Arden and Mirael did not claim a throne. They did not build a new religion. They remained in the Black Sepulchre, which was no longer a place of haunted magic, but a beacon. A place of learning, where the old texts were studied not for dogma, but for understanding. A place of healing, where the wounds of the land, both physical and spiritual, were gently tended. They were changed, both of them. Arden's storms were quiet, his smiles came easier. The light within him had not made him soft, it had made him complete. Mirael's light was no longer a separate, holy thing, it was tempered by the resilience and understanding she had learned from his shadows. They walked the world between flesh and starlight, guardians of the balance they had sacrificed everything to achieve. Sometimes, at dusk, when the last light of day bled into the first shadows of night, they would stand on the highest tower, hand in hand. He was the shadow that gave the light its definition. She was the light that gave the shadow its hope. Their love had not healed the land in a single, blinding moment. It had given it the chance to heal itself. And as the first stars pricked the velvet sky, a testament to the endless, cycling dance of dark and light, they knew their story was not an ending. It was a beginning. As the final notes of our tale fade into the echoes of starlight and shadow, the story of Arden and Mirael finds its rest. But every ending is a new beginning. If the bond of blood and starlight captivated you, if the Gothic castles and sweeping landscapes lived in your mind, then your journey doesn't have to end here. Subscribe to our channel, so you never miss a step into another world where love defies destiny. Let us know that this story mattered. Leave a comment below, tell us which moment between shadow and light shattered you, which character's choice left you breathless. Your thoughts weave the magic for what we create next. And if you would guide other listeners to this epic tale of forbidden love and redemption, please like this audiobook and share it. Help us build a sanctuary for those who seek stories where passion is a power, love is a rebellion, and the greatest battles are fought for the soul. Thank you for listening. Until the next comet crosses the sky.